Hey, so you all seen Braveheart, but the real William Wallace story is far more brutal. Portrayed by his own countrymen, delivered to London for an execution designed to destroy not just a man but a symbol. This is how William Wallace really died. In this episode of the discussion Salon, we uncover the final chapter of one of Scotland's most enduring figures, not the romantic myth, but the hard historical reality. We follow known evidence of his movements, the trial that condemned him, and the gruesome execution at Smithfield, and the political context that surrounded his final days. So, Wallace after Falkirk. Following the Battle of Falkirk in July 1298, Wallace resigned as Guardian of Scotland. Leadership was passed down to Robert the Bruce and John Cunning. Wallace's resignation reflected not only the military failure, but the ongoing divisions amongst the Scottish nobility. Many lords, especially those loyal to King John, had never accepted Wallace's authority. Wallace disappeared from Scottish political life for several years, but records show that by 1299 he was in France, seeking aid for Scotland's cause. In Lubeck, Germany, a surviving letter bearing Wallace's seal asked merchants to support trade with Scotland. Even though there was no formal alliance came with these missions, they show that William remained active in the name of Scotland. Some later sources claim he may have visited Rome to appeal to the Pope, but there is no direct proof of this ever happening. So Wallace was returned to Scotland and renewed tensions. By 1304, William was back in Scotland. His status had changed. Most of the Scottish nobility had submitted to Edward I. Wallace remained defiant. Even though there's no detailed records of Wallace's activities during this time, English administrative documents do note unrest in the Scottish borders. Some historians suggest that Wallace resumed small-scale resistance, such as raids or ambushes. This guerrilla-style resistance was difficult to trace and even harder to suppress. Regardless, Wallace was still seen as a dangerous person by the English crown, and a price remained on his head. Edward issued renewed orders for his capture. So the betrayal by Monteith. In 1305, Wallace was captured near Glasgow. The man responsible for this was Sir John de Monteith, a Scottish nobleman serving as a sheriff of Dumbarton under English rule. Multiple chronicles written after Wallace's death suggest that both English and Scottish agree that Monteith apprehended Wallace and handed him over to Sir John Seagrave, Edward's commander in Scotland. But the question is, why did Monteith betray Wallace? Well, there is a widely circulated theory. At the Battle of Falkirk, Monteith's nephew, Sir John Stewart of Bonkill, was killed. According to sources, that Stewart fell from his horse and he was quickly surrounded by his archers to protect him. But the advancing English army overwhelmed them all, and they all were slain on the battlefield. While this was happening, Wallace was retreating from the battlefield. So it's been suggested that Monteith never forgave Wallace for his perceived abandonment of his nephew, while Wallace just retreated. There is no direct evidence that Monteith did act out of revenge, but however, this theory has persisted for centuries and it is noted by earlier historians. Another version of the betrayal comes from the English chronicler Piers Langtoft. He wrote that Wallace was given up by his servant, and his servant name was Jack Short, who revealed his master's location to the English. Now, if this was true, it would explain how Wallace was found, but this claim is only recorded in English sources, not in Scottish sources. So, the journey to London. After this capture, Wallace was taken to London on horseback. This is a journey of nearly 400 miles. He passed through Dumbarton Castle en route. This was likely for security, but there's no evidence that he was ever paraded through towns or displayed in chains. However, he would have been in some sort of chains to make sure he didn't escape, and he was under armed guard along the way. So this journey was long and grim, and it was a physical journey and also symbolic of stripping Wallace of his freedom. And despite the modern myth, Wallace was not imprisoned in the Tower of London. Instead, he was held under heavy guard in a private home of a London alderman, William de Lair, and he lived in Fenchurch Street. The trial at Westminster. On the 23rd of August 1305, William was tried at Westminster. He was accused of treason, murder, piracy, sacrilege, robbery, and arson. These charges were delivered in the name of Edward I. Wallace's defence was simple and consistent. He never swore loyalty to Edward, therefore could not be found guilty of treason. As he is reputedly have said, I cannot be a traitor, for I owe him no allegiance. He considered himself a loyal subject of King John Beliar, but the outcome was already decided. Wallace was not allowed any legal representation, he was denied the right to call witness, and his trial was not justice, it was political theatre. His fate had been sealed before the proceedings began. So just a re-break from this story here. Hey everybody, my name is Paul, I run the discussion salon. This is where we peel back the layers of time and explore real cases, real people, and the dark corners of historical records. So if you've been following the channel, you know we're not about sensationalism, we're just about the truth. And from forgotten trials, executions to political betrayals and other sorts of crimes, everything we do is grounded in research, evidence, and respect for the past. But putting this type of content together takes hours, maybe sometimes days. So just be having a look through stuff and getting the videos all done and all ready. So there is a way you can come in, and by supporting the discussion salon on Patreon, it does help the channel, and it can also help me do real content. And also, there is a chance, if enough people join, of winning some sort of prize. So if you like this type of content and you'd like to see this channel continue, please go onto the Patreon and support us through the Patreon there. Well, I'd like to thank you all, and let's go on to the story. The execution at Smithfield. William was sentenced to be hung, drawn and quartered. This was the most severe punishment in English law, and it was only reserved for those who Edward not only wanted killed but erased. His execution was carried out later that same day of his trial, the 23rd of August, and it was done on St. Bartholomew's Eve. So one theory suggests that Edward chose this day deliberately, as St. Bartholomew was a patron saint of butchers. So the symbolism was not lost. There's also a big fair going on. Because it was St. Bartholomew's Eve, there was a traditional fair happening at the same day. So William would be butchered. So just outside of Westminster, William was tied to a hurdle and dragged through the streets all the way to Smithfield. And once he was at the execution site, he was hung by the neck till nearly dead, then taken down and placed on a table where he was emasculated. His genitals were removed and he was disemboweled, and his genitals and bowels were placed on maybe a hot plate or a fire and burnt in front of him, and while he was still alive he could smell his own body burning. Then the final blow came in. He was beheaded, and after they took his head, they quartered him up. Now, contrary to belief again, there's no record of his heart ever being removed. The brutality he endured was sufficient enough to strike fear into anybody still dreaming of this type of resistance. So the fate of his body. Wallace's body was mutilated to send us a message. His head was dipped in tar and placed on a pike on the top of London Bridge. His 4 limbs were sent to different towns: Newcastle, Berwick, Stirling and Perth. These weren't random choices, these were choices that were important parts of what happened to Wallace. The display of the body parts was a public warning. We had the English piebald's where the official government records confirmed that money was paid for the transportation of the Wallace's remains. Payments were made for horseshoes, nails, barrels of tar. Couriers were reimbursed for delivering the corpses. This was not mob violence or hasty revenge. It was state-sponsored execution down to the last nail. So, Wallace's legacy. Wallace was not flayed alive. He was not a mythical warrior painted in blue. He was a real man, born in the lowlands, trained as a knight, driven by conviction. He fought for a cause, not a crown. His trial was a show. His execution was a statement. But Edward I's plan did not succeed. The attempt to obliterate Wallace's memory only elevated it. His story is grounded in rebellion and sacrifice and lives on, not just in folklore but in history. His name survived, carved into stone, whispered into legend, and passed through the generations. This is the final thought. In tearing Wallace apart, Edward tried to destroy the man, the myth, and the movement. But Scotland remembered, and centuries later, we still do. This has been the Discussion Salon. Thank you for joining us as we uncover the truth. Not the legend, but the truth of William's final days. I thank you all, and you all take care.